My husband raised his champagne glass and smiled at 200 guests before saying, 35 years of marriage teaches you patience, especially when your wife stopped trying 15 years ago. Laughter scattered across the ballroom. I stood frozen beneath the crystal chandeliers while my husband, Daniel Henry, looked at me like I was an old piece of furniture he regretted keeping. Then I noticed Vanessa Collins near the stage smiling like she had already won. What nobody knew was that I had spent the last 3 weeks preparing a very different anniversary gift. And in less than 5 minutes, the giant screen behind Daniel was about to destroy his entire life. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or humiliated by someone who was supposed to love you, I want you to tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I read every comment because stories like this remind us that no woman is ever too old to reclaim her dignity. And if emotional stories about strength, family, and justice speak to your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with me through the rest of this journey. People used to look at me and Daniel Henry like we were the kind of couple younger generations could learn from. 35 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, a stunning house in Buckhead, a respected husband with his name printed on downtown billboards beside the words, senior partner. And me, always standing beside him with a polite smile, perfectly curled hair, and a hand resting lightly on his arm like I belonged there. Maybe once, I truly did. When I met Daniel, he was not the confident, silver-haired attorney people admired at charity galas. He was a nervous, 25-year-old law student working nights at a grocery store outside Savannah. His shoes were worn at the heels, and he used to apologize every time he could only afford 1 milkshake for both of us. I still remember the first time he told me he loved me. We were sitting on the hood of his old Ford in the middle of July heat, watching fireworks burst over the river. You make me believe I could become somebody, he whispered. Back then, I believed love meant helping someone build their dreams. I didn't know that sometimes, after people finish building their lives, they start looking down on the hands that helped them do it. I had dreams too once. Most people don't ask older women about the dreams they gave up. It makes everyone uncomfortable. But I wanted to become a school principal someday. I loved teaching. I loved children. I loved watching shy students slowly discover confidence in themselves. I had even been accepted into a graduate leadership program before Ethan was born. Then Daniel got an opportunity at a prestigious law firm in Atlanta. We'll only sacrifice for a few years, he promised me. A few years became decades. I stayed home while he worked 80-hour weeks. I packed lunches. I attended parent-teacher conferences alone. I took care of his sick mother for 3 years while Daniel traveled for conferences and networking dinners. When he forgot birthdays, I reminded the children that their father was working hard for us. When he missed anniversaries, I defended him. When he lost his temper from stress, I forgave him. Because that's what women of my generation were taught to do. Protect the marriage. Protect the family. Protect the man. Even if nobody protected you. The strange thing about sacrifice is that people praise it while you're useful. But once your sacrifices become expected, they stop seeing them at all. Daniel's success came slowly at first, then all at once. One important case led to another. His firm expanded. Reporters started quoting him on local news channels. Politicians invited him to fundraising events. Wealthy businessmen wanted photographs beside him. And every year, Daniel became more polished, more expensive, more admired, while I became quieter, smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. There were moments I tried to ignore the change in him. Like the first time he corrected me sharply in front of dinner guests because I mispronounced the name of a French restaurant. Or when he started introducing me simply as my wife Fiona, instead of the woman who kept me sane through law school. Eventually, he stopped reaching for my hand in public. Then he stopped reaching for it in private too. I remember standing in our kitchen one evening about 5 years ago, chopping vegetables for dinner, while Daniel scrolled through emails on his phone. I asked him if he wanted to take a weekend trip to Charleston together, just the two of us. He didn't even look up. At our age, he said with a little laugh. What would we even do at our age? The words shouldn't have hurt, but they did. Because somewhere along the way, Daniel stopped seeing us as two people growing older together. He started seeing aging as something happening only to me, not him. Men like Daniel become dangerous when the world keeps rewarding them for pretending time hasn't touched them. At 58, I had laugh lines around my mouth and silver woven through my dark hair. Daniel had gray hair too, but people called him distinguished. When my body changed, I became invisible. When his changed, people called him powerful. That double standard settled quietly inside our marriage like dust. Nobody bothered cleaning anymore. There were little comments over the years. You used to care more about how you dressed. You should start going to the gym with Megan. You know confidence matters at our age, always said casually. Always with plausible deniability. The kind of cruelty that leaves no bruises but slowly teaches you to doubt your own worth. And I did doubt myself. More than I want to admit. Especially after the children grew up and moved away. The house became quieter. Daniel became colder. Sometimes we would sit through entire dinners speaking only about practical things. The plumber, taxes, Megan's promotion, Ethan's condo renovation. Nothing real, nothing intimate. One night, I stood in front of our bathroom mirror removing my makeup while Daniel brushed his teeth beside me. I caught him staring at my reflection for half a second. Not with love, not even with anger, just disappointment. Like he was comparing me to some invisible image in his head and realizing I no longer matched it. That look stayed with me for months. You can survive a lot in marriage. Stress, money problems, arguments. But once someone starts looking at you like you are no longer enough, something inside you begins breaking very quietly. The frightening part is that nobody else notices. From the outside, Daniel still kissed my cheek at charity events, still bought flowers on birthdays, still posted anniversary photographs online with captions about my beautiful wife. People commented things like couple goals, true love still exists. You two are inspiring. I used to read those comments and wonder if I was losing my mind, because the man they admired in photographs barely looked at me once the cameras disappeared. And yet even then, I never imagined he would humiliate me publicly. I never imagined he would become cruel enough to enjoy it. Looking back now, maybe the warning signs were always there. Maybe success didn't change Daniel. Maybe it simply revealed who he had always been underneath admiration money and polished suits. A man who loved being adored more than he loved being loyal. And unfortunately for me, the older I became, the less useful I was to his image. But Daniel Henry made one fatal mistake. He thought years of silence meant I would stay silent forever. He had no idea how dangerous a woman becomes once she realizes she has nothing left to protect except her dignity. The first lie wasn't the affair. It was the moment Daniel started hiding pieces of himself from me and pretending I was imagining the distance between us. Affairs don't begin in hotel rooms. They begin in silence, in locked phone screens, in unanswered questions, in tiny shifts that slowly teach a woman to stop trusting her own instincts. At first, the changes seemed almost ridiculous to notice after 35 years of marriage. Daniel suddenly cared about his appearance in ways he hadn't in decades. He bought tailored suits instead of his usual conservative ones. He started wearing expensive Italian cologne so strong I could smell it lingering in our bathroom long after he left for work. twice a week became 5 times a week at the gym. He whitened his teeth. Started getting regular haircuts every 2 weeks instead of every 2 months. One evening, I walked into our bedroom and found him trying on shirts in front of the mirror like a teenage boy preparing for a first date. When he saw me standing there, he quickly tossed one shirt onto the bed. What, he asked sharply. Nothing, I said. But it wasn't nothing. Because men don't reinvent themselves at 61 for no reason. Not men who barely looked up from the television for the previous 10 years. Still, I told myself I was being insecure. That maybe Daniel simply wanted to feel younger. Aging scares everyone. Especially people who built their identity around success and admiration. Then came the phone. For most of our marriage, Daniel left his phone anywhere. Kitchen counters, coffee tables, bathroom sinks. Sometimes he even asked me to answer messages for him while he drove. Then suddenly, his phone became an extension of his body. Always face down, always in his pocket, always locked. If he stepped into the shower, the phone went with him into the bathroom. If he walked the dog, the phone went too. One night around midnight, I woke up and realized Daniel wasn't beside me. I found him downstairs, sitting in the dark kitchen lit only by the glow of his screen. He smiled at something he was reading. Not a polite smile. Not a professional smile. A warm one. Intimate. The kind I had not seen directed at me in years. Before I could speak, he quickly locked the screen. "You scared me," he snapped. "I couldn't sleep," I said quietly. He stood immediately. "You should try melatonin." Then he walked past me without another word. I stood alone in that dark kitchen, feeling foolish for being hurt by something I couldn't even prove. That became the pattern. Tiny moments, tiny cuts. Daniel began working late more often. At first, once a week, then 3 times, then almost every night. There was always a reason. Client dinners, emergency meetings, networking events. One Saturday morning, I asked casually, "Do lawyers really work this much at your age?" Daniel looked irritated before I even finished the sentence. "What exactly are you implying, Fiona? Nothing," I said quickly, but he kept staring at me. "You know," he muttered, "not every man who stays busy is cheating." The word hit me like cold water. Cheating. I had never said it. He did. People tell on themselves in strange ways. After that conversation, I started paying closer attention. Not because I wanted to spy on my husband, because I wanted peace. I wanted anyone to tell me I was wrong. But instead, every detail made the knot in my stomach tighter. One Tuesday evening, Daniel came home almost cheerful. He poured himself bourbon, loosened his tie, and even kissed my cheek as he passed through the kitchen. "You seem happy," I said carefully. "Good meeting," he replied. Then his phone buzzed. I watched his entire face change. A softness entered his expression so naturally, it made my chest ache. He picked up the phone instantly. "I'll take this upstairs." Something inside me whispered, a husband doesn't run away to answer business calls with that smile. 10 minutes later, I quietly climbed the stairs. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. At least, that's what I told myself. But before I reached the bedroom, I heard him laugh. Not the polished laugh he used around clients. Not the tired laugh he gave our children at holidays. This laugh was younger, flirtatious, alive. "Your trouble," he murmured softly. I froze. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I was listening to another man. Then Daniel said something that made my entire body go cold. If Fiona ever saw these messages, she'd probably faint. I nearly dropped the laundry basket in my hands. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was humiliation. Because hearing your husband joke about betraying you hurts differently than betrayal itself. It means the affair isn't just physical, it's entertainment. I stepped backward quietly before he could hear me. Then I locked myself in the downstairs bathroom and stared at my reflection for almost 20 minutes. I looked pale, old, pathetic. At least that's how I felt in that moment. I remember gripping the edge of the sink and whispering to myself, "Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry." Because somehow, crying would have made it real. The next morning, Daniel acted completely normal. He kissed the top of my head while pouring coffee, asked if I needed anything from the grocery store, mentioned an upcoming charity dinner. I kept watching him, wondering how someone could become two different people overnight. How does a man laugh intimately with another woman upstairs, then come downstairs and ask his wife whether she wants almond milk or oat milk? That level of compartmentalization frightened me. A few days later, Megan came over for dinner. My daughter had always adored her father. Daniel encouraged her career ambitions, helped her network, praised her intelligence constantly. Sometimes I envied how easily he gave her validation. During dinner, Daniel kept checking his phone beneath the table. Megan noticed too. "Dad, are you secretly texting another family?" she joked. Daniel laughed. Can you imagine? I tried to smile, but something in my expression must have shifted, because Megan looked at me strangely afterward while helping clear dishes. "What's wrong with you lately?" she asked quietly. "What do you mean? You seem paranoid all the time." The word stung. Paranoid. I wondered if Daniel had already started preparing the narrative. Older wife, emotionally unstable, overreacting. I suddenly felt terrified, not just of betrayal, but of becoming the woman nobody believes. That night, after Megan left, I finally asked him directly, "Is there someone else?" Daniel looked genuinely offended, then angry. "Jesus Christ, Fiona. That's not an answer." "You know what your problem is," he snapped. "You sit in this house all day creating drama in your head. I'm asking a simple question, and I'm telling you that you're acting paranoid." There it was again. Paranoid. Not hurt. Not concerned. Not reassuring. Just irritated. Like my pain was inconveniencing him. Then he delivered the sentence that stayed with me long after the argument ended. "Maybe if you focused more on yourself instead of obsessing over me, you wouldn't feel so insecure." I stared at him in silence. Because after 35 years together, I finally understood something terrifying. Daniel no longer viewed me as his partner. He viewed me as an obstacle to his happiness. And deep down, I think he was already hoping I would quietly disappear before he had to admit the truth out loud. I met Vanessa Collins 3 months before I discovered the truth. At the time, I didn't know she was sleeping with my husband. I only knew she looked at me like she had already replaced me in her mind. The event was a charity fundraiser held at the Four Seasons in downtown Atlanta. Daniel's law firm sponsored it every year, and wives were expected to attend wearing expensive dresses and permanent smiles. I almost didn't go that night. Daniel and I had barely spoken for 2 days after our argument about cheating, and I was emotionally exhausted from pretending everything was normal. But years of marriage condition women like me to perform, even when we're breaking inside. So, I curled my hair, put on pearl earrings, applied lipstick carefully over trembling lips, and stood beside my husband while strangers admired our beautiful marriage. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished marble floors. Wealthy donors drifted from table to table holding champagne flutes, while photographers captured images for society magazines. Daniel thrived in rooms like that. He knew exactly how loudly to laugh, exactly whose shoulder to touch, exactly how to make people feel important while keeping himself at the center of attention. I used to admire that confidence. That night, I noticed how calculated it really was. We had barely entered the ballroom when a young woman approached us holding a tablet against her chest. She was stunning. Not in the loud, flashy way some women try too hard to be. Vanessa was polished, elegant, sharp. Dark blonde hair fell in soft waves over one shoulder, and her white dress fit her body perfectly without looking inappropriate. She looked like the kind of woman luxury brands hire for advertisements about effortless success. The moment Daniel saw her, his entire posture changed. Subtle, but noticeable. His shoulders straightened, his expression softened, his eyes lit up. "Vanessa," he said warmly. "There you are, there you are. Not, this is Vanessa from work. Not, have you met my wife? There you are." Like he'd been waiting for her. Vanessa smiled at him first, then at me. "Mrs. Henry," she said smoothly, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you." The words were polite, but something underneath them felt wrong. Women know. No matter how much society tells us we're paranoid, insecure, emotional, dramatic, women know when another woman is measuring her. I shook her hand anyway. "It's nice to meet you." Daniel quickly inserted himself into the conversation. "Vanessa practically saved this entire event," he said proudly. "She's brilliant." I noticed he emphasized the word brilliant the way men often do when trying to justify inappropriate attachment. Not beautiful, not attractive. Brilliant. As though intelligence somehow made emotional betrayal more respectable. Vanessa lowered her eyes modestly. "Oh, Daniel's being generous. Daniel. Not Mr. Henry, not Sir. Daniel. A small detail. But after 35 years of marriage, I noticed every small detail. Throughout the evening, I kept seeing them together. Too close, too comfortable, too synchronized." At one point, I watched Vanessa adjust Daniel's tie while laughing at something he whispered to her. My stomach tightened instantly. No woman casually fixes a married man's tie unless boundaries disappeared long ago. Still, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe younger women were simply more casual now. Maybe corporate culture had changed. Maybe I was becoming exactly what Daniel accused me of being, paranoid. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. Later that evening, I stepped into the ladies' lounge to escape the noise for a moment. Two women stood near the mirrors, reapplying lipstick while talking quietly. One of them nodded toward the ballroom. "That PR woman is definitely sleeping with somebody important," she whispered. The other laughed softly. "Please. You can tell by the way she looks at him. At him. Not who. Him." I felt my pulse quicken immediately. Before I could stop myself, I stepped closer to the sink just enough to hear better. "Poor wife," the first woman murmured. "She seems sweet." The second woman shrugged. "These older men always think a younger woman makes them young again. Older men, younger woman, poor wife." I stood completely still, staring at my reflection in the mirror, while their words crawled under my skin. Then one of them noticed me. The conversation ended instantly. Awkward silence filled the room. Neither woman apologized. Because they knew. And deep down, I think they realized I knew too. When I returned to the ballroom, Daniel and Vanessa were standing near the stage, laughing together privately. He touched the small of her back. Briefly, possessively, intimately. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. That gesture broke something inside me because it used to belong to me. For years, Daniel guided me through crowded rooms with his hand resting gently against my back. It had always made me feel protected, chosen, loved. Now I watched him give that same touch to another woman while I stood 20 feet away pretending not to notice. I suddenly felt old in a way I never had before. Not physically, spiritually. Like the world had quietly decided women my age were expected to step aside gracefully, while younger women inherited our lives. Then came the moment I could never forget. Near the end of the fundraiser, I walked onto the terrace outside the ballroom searching for fresh air. Atlanta glittered beneath the night sky. The city looked beautiful from that height. Cold wind brushed against my bare shoulders as I stood alone listening to distant traffic below. Then I heard heels clicking behind me. Vanessa. She smiled when she saw me. Beautiful view, isn't it? Yes, I replied carefully. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa leaned casually against the railing beside me. You must be very proud of Daniel, she said. Something about her tone unsettled me instantly. Not admiration, assessment, like she was studying how much I knew. He's worked very hard, I answered. Vanessa nodded slowly. Men like Daniel need women who understand ambition. The sentence sat strangely between us. I looked at her directly for the first time that evening. And what exactly does that mean? She smiled faintly. Some women grow with successful men. Others? She paused delicately. Others become comfortable. There it was. Not an accusation, not openly, but sharp enough to wound. I stared at her in disbelief. This woman barely knew me. Yet she spoke as though she had already judged my entire worth. Before I could respond, another woman stepped onto the terrace calling Vanessa's name. Vanessa turned to leave, but just before walking away, she glanced back at me and said something I would replay in my head for weeks afterward. Some people don't realize when their chapter is over. Then she disappeared back into the ballroom. I stood frozen beneath the city lights, unable to move. My chapter is over. The cruelty of it wasn't just the insult, it was the confidence. Vanessa spoke like a woman who believed she had already won. And the terrifying part, for the first time in 35 years of marriage, I was beginning to fear she might be right. 3 weeks after the fundraiser, Daniel announced the anniversary party over breakfast, like he was unveiling a business merger. I booked the Grand Magnolia Ballroom for October 18th, he said casually while reading emails on his iPad. 200 guests, maybe more. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. 200. It's our 35th anniversary, Fiona. People expect something significant. People. That word again. Everything in Daniel's life had become performance. Success wasn't enough anymore unless other people witnessed it. I stared at him across the kitchen island, trying to understand why a man who barely tolerated me privately suddenly wanted to celebrate our marriage publicly. You hate large parties, I said carefully. Daniel finally looked up. Well, life changes. No, people change. And I was beginning to realize my husband had become someone I no longer recognized. At first, part of me wanted to believe this anniversary party might somehow fix us. That sounds pathetic now, but long marriages train women to survive on crumbs of hope. Maybe Daniel felt guilty. Maybe he wanted to reconnect. Maybe this was his awkward attempt to repair things before they completely broke apart. I held on to those possibilities for exactly 4 days. Then Vanessa Collins called my phone. Mrs. Henry, she chirped brightly. Daniel said I should coordinate some party details with you. Coordinate. The word immediately irritated me. Still, I forced politeness into my voice. What kind of details? Oh, just decorations, guest flow, media arrangements, visual presentations? She laughed softly. You know how men are with event planning. Media arrangements, visual presentations. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Over the next 2 weeks, Vanessa inserted herself into every aspect of the anniversary party. She chose the floral designer. She approved the lighting setup. She selected the music playlist. Every time I suggested something personal, family photos, meaningful songs, old memories, Vanessa somehow redirected the conversation toward something more sophisticated. It should feel elegant and modern, she explained during one planning meeting at the hotel ballroom. Modern. That word seemed aimed directly at me. I sat quietly at the long conference table while Vanessa clicked through digital presentations on a giant screen. Gold accents, minimalist decor, champagne towers, luxury branding. Nothing about it resembled 35 years of marriage. It looked more like a corporate awards gala. Daniel loved every detail. "You're incredible at this," he told Vanessa with open admiration. I watched her smile modestly while touching his arm lightly. Not one person in the room seemed uncomfortable except me. And that was the frightening part. Affairs thrive in environments where people pretend not to notice obvious things. One afternoon, after a planning session, I walked into the ballroom unexpectedly and found Vanessa standing extremely close to Daniel near the stage. They jumped apart so quickly it would have looked suspicious to anyone. But Daniel recovered fast. "Vanessa was just showing me the audiovisual setup," he said. I nodded slowly. Then I noticed something strange. The giant LED screen behind them displayed a slideshow titled "Daniel Henry, A Legacy of Excellence, Not Our Marriage." Not 35 years together. Daniel, just Daniel. Photographs flashed across the screen. Daniel shaking hands with politicians. Daniel speaking at conferences. Daniel receiving awards. Daniel standing beside celebrities. I searched for family photos. There were barely any. "You made a tribute video?" I asked quietly. Vanessa smiled brightly. Daniel deserves to be celebrated. Something cold settled inside my chest. This wasn't our anniversary party. This was a coronation. And suddenly, I understood my role in it. I wasn't the honored wife. I was the aging prop standing beside a successful man while he publicly transitioned into his exciting new chapter. The realization made me physically nauseous. That evening, I confronted Daniel for the first time without apologizing for my feelings. "Why is Vanessa planning our anniversary?" Daniel sighed dramatically like an exhausted parent dealing with a difficult child. "Because she's good at her job. She's not our family. She's part of my professional life. This party feels more about your image than our marriage." The second those words left my mouth, Daniel's expression hardened. "There it is," he muttered. "There what is your resentment." I stared at him in disbelief. "My resentment? You've been unhappy for years, Fiona. Maybe you should ask yourself why." The manipulation stunned me. Daniel had become skilled at turning every conversation into my failure. If I felt neglected, I was insecure. If I questioned him, I was paranoid. If I felt hurt, I was resentful. Suddenly, I understood why I'd spent years doubting my own instincts. Because every time reality made me uncomfortable, Daniel trained me to mistrust my interpretation of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered downstairs around 2 a.m. and sat alone in the dark living room staring at the framed photographs lining our shelves. Birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings, soccer games, graduations, 35 years of memories. I tried desperately to pinpoint the exact moment our marriage stopped being real. Was it gradual? Or had Daniel simply become better at pretending? Then something happened that finally shattered whatever denial I still had left. The next morning, Daniel left early for work after barely speaking to me. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a message from Megan. "Dad invited me to the anniversary planning dinner tonight. You coming too? Planning dinner." Daniel never mentioned it. I responded immediately. "What dinner?" A few seconds later, Megan sent a screenshot of a group text. Daniel, Megan, Vanessa, several firm associates, and not me. Dinner tonight at Bellamy's Steakhouse. Finalizing anniversary details. I stared at the screen, feeling heat rush into my face. My own anniversary party. And I hadn't even been invited to the planning dinner. Humiliation hit differently when it arrived quietly. Not through screaming, not through violence, but through exclusion. Through realizing people are building something around you while slowly removing you from the center of it. I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed. What, I wasn't invited to the planning dinner. Silence. Then, it's business-related. Our anniversary is business-related. You're overreacting again. There it was. Again. That word. Overreacting. As though any woman should calmly accept being erased from her own marriage celebration. I'm your wife, I whispered. Daniel exhaled impatiently. Fiona, not everything has to become emotional. Not everything has to become emotional. I nearly laughed. Because marriage itself is emotional. Or at least it's supposed to be. After he hung up, I sat alone at the kitchen table for nearly an hour, staring at nothing. Then slowly, something unexpected began replacing my sadness. Clarity. Pain can blind you at first. But eventually, enough humiliation forces you to see things exactly as they are. Daniel wasn't confused. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't emotionally distant because of stress. He was deliberately pushing me aside. And Vanessa wasn't simply an assistant helping with an event. She was rehearsing for my role. That night, while Daniel attended the planning dinner without me, I opened my laptop and searched for the contact information of a woman I hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 years, Linda Brooks. My old friend from church. The woman who used to work in forensic accounting before retirement. As my finger hovered over the call button, I realized something important. For months, I had been trying to save my marriage, but maybe it was finally time to start protecting myself instead. I hadn't spoken to Linda Brooks in almost 8 years when she answered my phone call. Fiona, she said immediately, sounding surprised. Honey, are you okay? The fact that she asked that before anything else nearly made me cry. People who truly know you can hear pain hiding beneath ordinary words. I need help, I whispered. Linda was silent for half a second. Then she said, Come over. No questions, no judgment. Just come over. That alone reminded me what genuine friendship feels like. Linda lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Roswell, in a modest brick house filled with books, framed family photographs, and the smell of cinnamon candles. The moment I stepped inside, she hugged me tightly. And for the first time in months, I felt safe enough to breathe honestly. We sat at her kitchen table drinking coffee while I told her everything. Daniel's coldness, Vanessa, the anniversary party, the strange comments, the phone calls, the humiliation. Linda listened without interrupting. Occasionally, her expression hardened, but she never once told me I was overreacting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and asked one question. Do you have access to your financial accounts? I blinked. What your accounts, Fiona? Joint banking, credit cards, investments. I stared at her, confused by the sudden shift. This isn't just emotional, Linda said carefully. Men who plan exits usually prepare financially before they prepare emotionally. A chill ran through me. You think Daniel is planning to leave me? Linda hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. I think wealthy men rarely humiliate their wives publicly unless they've already convinced themselves they're done. The words hurt. Not because I disagreed, because deep down, I knew she was right. Linda had spent nearly 25 years working in forensic accounting before retiring. She specialized in divorce-related financial investigations. She had seen everything: secret accounts, mistresses hidden through fake business expenses, men transferring money before filing divorce papers, women discovering decades of deception only after it was too late. "You need facts," she told me firmly, "not feelings." That sentence changed me. For months I had been drowning emotionally, crying privately, questioning myself, trying to decode Daniel's behavior. But facts were different. Facts couldn't be manipulated. So the next morning, while Daniel was at work, I logged into our joint financial accounts for the first time in years. What I found made my hands shake. At first, the expenses seemed ordinary enough: business dinners, travel reimbursements, hotel charges connected to conferences. But Linda taught me to look for patterns instead of individual transactions, and patterns started appearing quickly. Luxury restaurants on nights Daniel claimed he worked late. Hotel suites booked less than 15 miles from our home. Jewelry purchases I had never received. Repeated payments to a high-end apartment complex in Midtown Atlanta. I stared at the screen, feeling physically sick. Magnolia Residences, I read aloud. I knew that building. Modern luxury condos, private parking, rooftop pool, the kind of place younger professionals showed off on social media. Not the kind of place married 61-year-old attorneys secretly paid for unless they had a reason. Linda sat beside me quietly reviewing the statements. Then she pointed to something else. "Look at this." I leaned closer. Several large transfers had been moved from one of our shared investment accounts into a separate business holding company connected to Daniel's firm. "When did this happen?" I whispered. "Over the last 6 months," Linda replied grimly. 6 months. That meant while Daniel was kissing my forehead goodbye each morning, he had already begun separating assets behind my back. My chest tightened painfully. Not because of the money, because betrayal feels different when it becomes strategic. Affairs are painful enough, but secretly preparing financially means the deception wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, planned, cold. I suddenly realized Daniel hadn't just been cheating on me. He had been quietly dismantling our marriage while pretending it still existed. Linda printed several documents carefully. "You need copies of everything she said? I feel like I'm spying. You're protecting yourself." I looked down at the papers spread across the table. 35 years of loyalty reduced to spreadsheets and hidden transactions. "I don't understand how someone can do this," I whispered. Linda's expression softened. Fiona people don't become cruel overnight. They become comfortable being cruel. That sentence stayed with me. Comfortable being cruel. Daniel had become so certain of his own power that he no longer feared consequences. And maybe that was his greatest mistake. Over the next 2 weeks, Linda helped me uncover more. Far more. Daniel had purchased expensive handbags from boutiques I never visited, spa reservations for 2, weekend hotel stays under abbreviated versions of his name. Then came the discovery that shattered whatever hope I still had left: a lease agreement. Linda found it buried among digital statements connected to automatic payments. Tenant Vanessa Collins, emergency contact Daniel Henry. I stared at the screen so long my vision blurred. There it was. Proof. Not suspicion. Not intuition. Proof. My husband had rented an apartment for another woman using marital funds. My entire body went numb. Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. But I could barely hear her, because suddenly, dozens of confusing moments made horrifying sense. The new cologne, the gym, the late nights, the emotional distance, the secretive phone calls. Daniel wasn't simply having an affair. He was building a second life. And the cruelest part, he was financing it with money we built together over 35 years. That evening, Daniel came home unusually cheerful. He loosened his tie and walked into the kitchen smiling. "You should see the latest anniversary plans," he said casually. "The ballroom looks incredible." I stared at him across the counter, at this stranger wearing my husband's face. For one dangerous moment, I almost confronted him immediately. I almost screamed, almost threw the printed statements at him, almost demanded answers. But something stopped me. Not fear, clarity. Because for the first time, I understood the imbalance between us. Daniel believed he controlled the narrative. He thought I was emotional, dependent, too weak to fight back intelligently. And if I confronted him too early, he would simply become more careful. No, I needed patience now. The same patience women like me spend decades learning. So instead, I smiled faintly and asked, "How's Vanessa handling all the planning?" The change in his face lasted less than a second, but I saw it. That flash of alarm. Tiny, instant, gone. "She's doing excellent work," he answered carefully. I nodded slowly. "I'm sure she is." That night, after Daniel fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring into darkness while rage slowly replaced heartbreak. Not wild rage, not screaming rage, cold rage. The kind born from realizing someone mistook your kindness for weakness. At around 2 a.m, I quietly got out of bed and walked downstairs. I sat alone in the living room with the lease agreement in my hands. Vanessa Collins, 34 years old. Living in an apartment my husband secretly paid for. A woman young enough to be closer to my daughter's age than mine. I should have hated her more than Daniel. But strangely, I didn't. Because women like Vanessa only enter doors that men like Daniel open willingly. He was the one who made vows to me. He was the one who promised forever. He was the one dismantling our life piece by piece, while expecting me to smile politely at anniversary speeches. Then, another terrifying thought entered my mind. What exactly was Daniel planning to do at that anniversary party? Because men don't usually spend this much effort polishing their public image before detonating their private lives. And suddenly, deep in my bones, I knew something awful. The anniversary party wasn't meant to celebrate our marriage. It was meant to bury it. 3 days later, Linda gave me the number for a private investigator named Walter Hayes. "He's discreet," she said. "Retired Atlanta PD. Used to work financial crimes and domestic surveillance." I stared at the number written on the small, yellow sticky note in my hand. For several seconds, I couldn't bring myself to call. Hiring a private investigator felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. It made everything real. Suspicion still leaves room for denial. Evidence destroys it. "You don't have to do this," Linda said gently. But we both knew I already did. Because once trust disappears from a marriage, truth becomes survival. I called Walter that afternoon from my car parked outside a grocery store because somehow I couldn't bear making that phone call from inside my own home. His voice sounded calm and rough with age. Walter Hayes. I swallowed hard. "My name is Fiona Henry. Linda Brooks gave me your number." There was a brief pause. "All right," he said quietly. "Tell me what's going on." An hour later, I sat across from him in a small office above an insurance agency in Marietta. Walter looked exactly like someone who spent decades seeing the worst side of human behavior. Gray hair, broad shoulders, kind but tired eyes. No unnecessary friendliness, no fake sympathy. He simply listened while I explained everything. The affair, Vanessa, the hidden apartment, The anniversary party. Walter took notes silently. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "You want proof?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He studied me carefully before asking his next question. "Or are you hoping I'll tell you there's nothing happening?" That question nearly broke me, because deep down, part of me still wanted rescue from reality. I wanted someone to say, "You misunderstood. Your husband still loves you. This can still be fixed." But I already knew those things weren't true. "I need the truth," I whispered. Walter nodded once. "Then be prepared for it." The investigation began the next morning. Walter worked quietly, professionally. He never dramatized anything, never gave emotional commentary. He simply documented facts, and every fact cut deeper than the one before it. The first report arrived 2 days later. Daniel leaving his office at 6:12 p.m. Vanessa entering his car at 6:18. Dinner reservation at a luxury restaurant in Midtown. Hotel valet ticket at 9:41 p.m. Departure at 7:15 the next morning. I sat at my kitchen table reading those details while my coffee grew cold beside me. It was strange how betrayal became both devastating and painfully ordinary once documented on paper. No romance, no mystery, just timestamps, locations, receipts, evidence. I thought that first report would numb me somehow. Instead, every new discovery hurt in a fresh way. Walter followed Daniel for nearly 2 weeks. The patterns became undeniable. Tuesday nights at the apartment, Thursday dinners, weekend business conferences that somehow included Vanessa every time. Then came the photographs. Walter delivered them in a sealed manila envelope one rainy afternoon. I almost couldn't open it. My hands trembled so badly I had to sit down. Inside were dozens of photographs. Daniel and Vanessa holding hands in a parking garage. Daniel kissing her forehead outside a restaurant. Vanessa laughing while sitting in the passenger seat of his car. And then, the photograph that shattered me completely. Daniel standing outside Savannah Grill, the restaurant where he proposed to me 36 years earlier. His arm wrapped around Vanessa's waist, looking at her with the exact same expression he once used to look at me. I pressed the photograph against the table and suddenly couldn't breathe. Not there. Anywhere but there. Some places in marriage become sacred simply because they hold memories. And Daniel had taken another woman to one of the most meaningful places in our entire life together. I cried harder that afternoon than I had cried in years. Not graceful tears. Not quiet tears. Ugly, gasping grief. Because at some point during betrayal, you stop mourning the relationship. You start mourning the person you thought existed. When the crying finally stopped, something unexpected happened. I became calm. Dangerously calm. There's a point where pain burns so deeply it stops feeling hot. It turns cold. Focused. That evening, Walter called me personally. "There's something else," he said carefully. My stomach tightened instantly. Would I overheard part of a conversation this afternoon? I gripped the phone harder. Daniel told Vanessa the anniversary party is the final performance. My heartbeat slowed strangely. What does that mean? Walter hesitated. I can't say for certain, but from context, it sounded like he plans to make some kind of announcement afterward. Announcement. The word echoed through me. Then Walter added quietly. He also said, "Once the party's over, I'll finally be free." Free, after 35 years of marriage, after everything we built together. Daniel spoke about freedom like I was a prison sentence. I thanked Walter mechanically before hanging up. Then I sat alone in silence for nearly an hour staring at the wall. everything suddenly made horrifying sense. The oversized anniversary party, the polished public image, the emotional distance, the humiliation. Daniel wasn't simply cheating. He was preparing an exit strategy. And worse, he intended to make himself look like the victim while doing it. I started replaying recent months in my head differently. The comments about my aging, the accusations of insecurity, calling me paranoid, emotional, resentful. Daniel had been laying groundwork. If he left me publicly after the anniversary party, people would already believe I was unstable and difficult. He was shaping the narrative before the truth ever surfaced. That realization changed something fundamental inside me. Because betrayal is one thing, but calculated psychological manipulation over months or years, that's cruelty, real cruelty. Later that night, Daniel came home around 11. He smelled like expensive whiskey and Vanessa's floral perfume. I recognized it immediately now. Funny how once you know the truth, your senses sharpen brutally. He loosened his tie while walking into the bedroom. "You still awake?" he asked casually. I looked up from my book. "Yes." Daniel glanced at me briefly. "You should really come with me to the firm gala next month. People keep asking where you've been. People. Always people. Never me. Never us." "You seem concerned about appearances lately," I said quietly. He frowned slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." Daniel stared at me for a second longer than usual. And for one terrifying moment, I wondered if he sensed something had changed in me too, because I was no longer the frightened woman begging silently for reassurance. Now I knew. And knowledge transforms humiliation into power. Not immediately, but eventually. Daniel walked into the bathroom, and I heard the shower start running. I sat perfectly still on the bed, listening to water hit tile, while rage moved slowly through my body like ice. Then my phone buzzed softly beside me. A message from Walter. One new attachment. Hands shaking, I opened it. It was a screenshot taken through a zoom lens from outside Vanessa's apartment window earlier that evening. Daniel sat on her couch with his arm around her shoulders, and on the television screen behind them was the digital layout for our anniversary party. I stared at the image in disbelief. They were literally planning my humiliation together. Suddenly, every remaining piece of denial disappeared forever. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a temporary affair. This was teamwork. And in that exact moment, while my husband showered 20 feet away, believing he still controlled everything, I made a decision. If Daniel Henry wanted a performance so badly, then I would give him one he would never forget. The hardest part of betrayal wasn't losing my husband. It was realizing I was slowly losing my children too. People like to believe family automatically stands together during painful times. That isn't always true. Sometimes manipulation spreads quietly through a household long before the truth surfaces. And Daniel had been planting seeds for months, maybe longer. I noticed it first with Megan. My daughter used to call me almost every day when she was younger. Even after moving into her downtown Atlanta condo, she still told me about work drama, bad dates, stressful meetings, and every little detail of her life. But lately, our conversations had changed. Shorter, careful, distant. At first, I blamed adulthood. Then I started noticing something else. Every time I expressed concern about Daniel, Megan reacted defensively, almost immediately. "Dad's just stressed. You know how demanding his work is. You're reading too much into things." The more pain I tried to explain, the more unreasonable I sounded to her. And suddenly, I understood something terrifying Daniel had already started controlling the story before I even knew there was a war happening. One Sunday afternoon, Megan came over for lunch while Daniel was at his office. I spent nearly 2 hours cooking roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and peach cobbler because feeding people has always been the way I express love. Megan barely touched her food. She kept checking her phone nervously. Finally, halfway through lunch, she sighed dramatically. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Something in her tone immediately made my stomach tighten. "Of course." She hesitated. "Then, are you okay emotionally lately?" Emotionally. Not, "Are you happy?" Not, "Is Dad treating you well emotionally?" Like I was becoming unstable. I set down my fork carefully. "Why would you ask that?" Megan avoided my eyes. "Dad's worried about you." There it was, the narrative. I felt heat rise into my chest. "What exactly has your father been saying?" "Nothing bad," she said quickly. "He just thinks you've been really sensitive lately. Sensitive, paranoid, emotional, resentful." Daniel was building a profile of me piece by piece, a woman nobody would trust once the marriage exploded publicly. I stared at my daughter across the table and suddenly felt exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. "Megan," I said quietly, "do you honestly believe I would invent problems in my marriage for attention?" She looked uncomfortable immediately. "That's not what I said, but you're wondering if I'm imagining things." Silence. Her silence answered everything. The pain of that moment cut deeper than I expected. Because betrayal from a husband breaks your heart. But losing your children's trust breaks something even more fundamental. Megan finally sighed. "Mom, I just think maybe you've been unhappy for a long time and you're projecting that onto Dad." Projecting. Another therapy word weaponized to dismiss women's instincts. I almost laughed from the cruelty of it. Daniel had managed to convince our daughter that my pain was psychological distortion instead of evidence. "I see," I whispered. Megan reached across the table awkwardly. "I just don't want you doing something dramatic." Something dramatic. I looked at my daughter carefully then. At the woman I raised. The little girl whose nightmares I comforted. Whose college applications I helped edit at midnight. Whose heartbreaks I sat through on bathroom floors. And suddenly, I realized something heartbreaking. Children often see their parents through the lens of power. Daniel was successful, confident, admired. I was emotional, quiet, aging. To Megan, her father looked stable while I looked wounded, and wounded people are rarely believed first. After lunch, Megan left quickly claiming she had another appointment downtown. The second her car disappeared from the driveway, I sat at the kitchen table and cried silently into my hands. Not because she doubted me, because part of me understood why. Daniel had always been excellent at appearances. That was his greatest talent. Not law, not business, performance. The next person I worried about was Ethan, but my son reacted differently. Ethan had inherited my habit of observing quietly before speaking. He rarely jumped to conclusions emotionally, which meant he noticed more than people realized. A few days after Megan's visit, Ethan stopped by unexpectedly after work. He walked into the kitchen, kissed my forehead, and immediately frowned. "You look tired." Simple words, no judgment, no hidden accusation, just concern. I nearly broke down right there. Instead, I forced a smile. "I'm fine." Ethan leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. "Mom?" That one word carried enough skepticism to make my chest tighten. I busied myself wiping already clean countertops. "When did you become such a bad liar?" he asked softly. Tears burned my eyes instantly. I turned away before he could see. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan said something that made my heart stop. "Is this about Dad?" I froze completely. Slowly, I turned around. "What makes you ask?" That Ethan hesitated before answering. "Because he's been acting strange for months." Relief and terror crashed through me simultaneously. "What do you mean?" Ethan shrugged lightly. "He's distracted. Secretive. Defensive." Then he looked at me directly. "And honestly, he acts guilty." The word hung between us heavily. Guilty. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table because suddenly my legs felt weak. Ethan walked over quietly and sat across from me. "Mom?" he said carefully. "Is there someone else?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Every instinct screamed at me to tell him everything. The affair, the apartment, the photographs, the lies. But another instinct stopped me. Protection. Even at 58 years old, mothers still want to protect their children from pain. "I don't know," I whispered finally. It wasn't entirely a lie. Because even with evidence, betrayal still feels impossible emotionally. Ethan stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I think you do know." Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. Ethan's expression changed immediately. Not frustration, not discomfort, anger. Not at me, at whoever caused those tears. He reached across the table and took my hand gently. And in that moment, I realized how long it had been since anyone touched me with genuine care. "You don't deserve this," he said quietly. The kindness in his voice nearly shattered me. I looked down quickly, because once mothers start crying in front of their children, it becomes difficult to stop. "I don't want this family destroyed," I whispered. Ethan squeezed my hand tighter. "Mom? Families don't get destroyed by the person telling the truth." That sentence stayed with me long after he left. Families don't get destroyed by truth. They get destroyed by betrayal, by lies, by humiliation, by manipulation. But still, I couldn't bring myself to expose Daniel yet. Not completely. Not while some small piece of me still hoped he might stop before everything became irreversible. Then came the moment that changed everything. 3 nights before the anniversary party, Daniel hosted a dinner at our house for several law partners and clients. Vanessa attended too. Of course she did. I watched her move comfortably through my kitchen carrying wine glasses like she belonged there. At one point, I walked into the dining room unexpectedly and caught Daniel whispering something into her ear. She laughed softly and touched his chest. Not accidentally, intimately. Then they noticed me standing there. Vanessa stepped back instantly. Daniel's expression hardened for half a second. That flash of irritation told me everything. He wasn't ashamed of being caught. He was annoyed I witnessed it. Later that night, after the guests left, I stood alone in the kitchen rinsing dishes while Daniel loosened his tie nearby. Without looking at me, he said casually, "Try not to embarrass me at the anniversary party." I turned slowly. "What does that mean?" Daniel finally looked at me, and for the first time in 35 years of marriage, I saw genuine contempt in my husband's eyes. "It means lately you've seemed unstable, emotional. I don't want any scenes, as if my pain were an inconvenience to his reputation, as if I were some fragile old woman he needed to manage publicly." I stared at him in silence, and suddenly, something inside me stopped breaking. It hardened instead. Because in that moment, I realized Daniel no longer feared hurting me. He only feared being exposed, and that gave me more power than he understood. The morning after Daniel warned me not to embarrass him, I stopped thinking like a wife. I started thinking like a survivor. That shift changed everything. For months, I had approached my pain emotionally. I cried. I questioned myself. I searched for ways to fix what Daniel had already decided to destroy. But now I understood something clearly. Daniel and Vanessa were planning a performance, and if I walked blindly onto that stage, they would control the ending of my story. I refused to let that happen. 3 days before the anniversary party, I drove to Linda's house carrying a leather folder filled with photographs, financial records, hotel receipts, and screenshots Walter had collected. Linda spread everything across her dining room table slowly. The evidence looked horrifying together, not because it was dramatic, because it was organized, consistent, deliberate. Affairs built on lies eventually create paperwork, and Daniel had left a trail everywhere. Linda adjusted her reading glasses while studying the documents. "You realize this is enough to destroy him publicly?" she said quietly. I stared down at the photographs. Daniel kissing Vanessa outside the Midtown apartment. Daniel holding her hand at restaurants. Daniel smiling at her in ways he hadn't smiled at me in years. "I don't want revenge," I whispered. Linda looked at me carefully. "No, I thought about that for a moment. Because revenge sounds ugly when women admit to it. Men call it power. Women get called bitter. What I wanted wasn't revenge. It was dignity. I want the truth to stop hiding," I finally said. Linda nodded slowly. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "What happens if Daniel humiliates you publicly at that party?" I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Fiona, men like Daniel rarely leave quietly once they've built an audience, especially narcissistic men. The word made me uncomfortable. Narcissistic. People throw it around casually these days. But the more I thought about Daniel's behavior, the more the pattern fit. His obsession with image, his need for admiration, his complete lack of empathy for my humiliation. The way he blamed me for reacting to his cruelty. Linda leaned forward slightly. "You need protection." "I already have evidence. That's not what I mean." She tapped the giant photograph Walter had taken of the ballroom's LED screen layout. "You need control of the narrative." The room went silent. Then slowly, an idea began forming in my mind. Terrifying. Dangerous. Necessary. That afternoon, I drove alone to the Grand Magnolia Hotel under the excuse of checking floral arrangements. The event manager, a young man named Chris, greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Henry, everything's almost perfect for Saturday." "Perfect." I nearly laughed. "Actually," I said calmly, "I wanted to discuss a surprise anniversary presentation for my husband." Chris smiled immediately. "Of course." I kept my voice steady. "I'd like to add a short personal tribute video during the event." "No problem at all," he replied. "We already have the audio-visual setup finalized." I glanced toward the massive LED screen dominating the ballroom wall. Nearly 20 feet wide, impossible to ignore. The same screen Daniel planned to use for his celebration. My pulse quickened. "What format do you need?" I asked. Chris explained the upload requirements while I nodded carefully. Then he added casually, "Mr. Henry's colleague, Vanessa, already coordinated most of the visual presentations." "Of course she did." I forced a smile. "Well, this one will be my personal surprise." When I left the hotel, my hands trembled so badly I had to sit in my car for several minutes before driving. Because suddenly, the possibility became real. I could expose everything. Publicly. One button, one screen, one moment, and Daniel's carefully constructed image would collapse in front of everyone who admired him. But another part of me still resisted. Not because he didn't deserve consequences, because public destruction changes people forever. There's no undoing humiliation once it becomes witnessed. That night, I sat alone in my home office surrounded by decades of family photographs, wedding pictures, Christmas mornings, beach vacations, Ethan's baseball games, Megan's college graduation, 35 years of a life that once felt real. I opened my laptop slowly. Then I created a folder titled Anniversary Video. My chest tightened instantly. At first, I only intended to organize evidence, nothing more. But as I started sorting files, another idea emerged naturally. What if the video began differently, not with betrayal, with truth, the real truth, the life we once had? I started uploading old photographs, Daniel and me dancing in our tiny first apartment, holding newborn Ethan, laughing on a Florida beach when we were both still young enough to believe love automatically lasted forever. Then came anniversary dinners, family road trips, Thanksgiving photographs. For nearly 2 hours, I built a beautiful tribute to our marriage. And while doing it, I cried, because somewhere inside those memories, there really had been love once. That was the cruelest part. If Daniel had always been heartless, losing him would have been easier. But he wasn't always this man. At some point, something inside him changed. Or maybe success simply gave him permission to become who he truly was, underneath admiration and power. Around midnight, I began adding the second half of the video. The hidden half. The real half. Walter's photographs, hotel receipts, bank transfers, screenshots of text messages, a copy of Vanessa's apartment lease. Then finally, the audio recording Walter captured 2 weeks earlier outside the apartment building. Daniel's voice saying, "After the anniversary party, I'll finally be free." I stared at the screen after adding that clip. My entire body felt cold. The contrast between the two halves of the video disturbed even me. Love, family, memories, then betrayal, lies, humiliation. It looked like two entirely different marriages. Maybe it was. The next afternoon, Ethan stopped by unexpectedly. I quickly minimized the video editing software before he could see my computer screen. He studied me carefully. "You okay?" "I'm fine." He didn't believe me. I could tell immediately. Ethan walked into the kitchen quietly while I made coffee. Then he spoke without turning around. "Mom, if something happens Saturday, I need you to know I'm with you." The sentence made my throat tighten instantly. "What makes you think something's going to happen?" Ethan finally faced me. "Because Dad's acting like a man preparing for a press conference instead of an anniversary." I almost smiled, despite everything. My son saw more than anyone realized, but I still couldn't tell him the truth. "Not yet. I just don't want you hurt." He continued softly. The irony nearly destroyed me. Because I was already hurt. What remained now was deciding how much pain I was willing to return. After Ethan left, I finished the video alone. When it was complete, I sat staring at the final timeline for nearly 20 minutes. The entire thing lasted just under 7 minutes. 7 minutes capable of detonating an entire life. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted, because despite everything Daniel had done, I still gave him one final chance. I made myself a promise that night. If Daniel treated me with dignity at the anniversary party, if he showed even 1 ounce of genuine respect, if he stopped trying to publicly diminish me, then I would never play the second half of the video. I would walk away privately afterward, quietly, gracefully, without destroying him publicly. But deep down, I think part of me already knew the truth. Men like Daniel only stop humiliating women once someone finally humiliates them back. The anniversary party began at 6 o'clock on a cool Saturday evening in October. By 5:30, the Grand Magnolia Ballroom already glowed with gold lighting and soft jazz drifting through crystal chandeliers. Everything looked expensive, elegant, perfect. Exactly the kind of event Daniel Henry loved. The kind where appearances mattered more than truth. I stood alone inside the hotel suite upstairs staring at my reflection while a makeup artist adjusted the final touches beneath my eyes. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Henry," she said warmly. Beautiful. I almost didn't recognize the word anymore. For months, I had felt invisible, old, discarded. But as I looked into the mirror that evening, I saw something different. Not youth, not perfection, strength. I wore the navy blue gown Ethan helped me choose 3 days earlier. Simple, elegant, timeless, nothing flashy. Daniel preferred glamorous women lately, women like Vanessa, who entered rooms demanding attention. But I wasn't trying to compete with youth anymore. I was trying to remember my own worth. The suite door opened suddenly behind me. Megan stepped inside wearing a champagne-colored satin dress and froze when she saw me. "Mom?" Her voice softened with genuine surprise. "You look amazing." I smiled faintly. "So do you." For a moment, neither of us mentioned the tension lingering between us for weeks. But I noticed the way Megan studied my face carefully. Like she was trying to understand something she'd previously ignored. "You nervous?" she asked quietly. The question almost made me laugh. Nervous didn't begin to describe what I felt. I had a 7-minute video hidden on a flash drive inside my purse, capable of destroying my husband's reputation in front of 200 people. "I'm fine," I said softly. Megan hesitated before speaking again. "Dad's downstairs already." Of course he was. Daniel loved making entrances. "Vanessa's here too," Megan added carefully. I looked at her calmly. I assumed she would be. Megan's expression tightened slightly, and suddenly, for the first time, I saw uncertainty in my daughter's eyes. Maybe she finally noticed how inappropriate Vanessa's presence really was. Or maybe women simply recognize truth faster once they stop wanting to avoid it. Downstairs, the ballroom buzzed with conversation, and champagne glasses clinking softly together. The moment Daniel saw me descend the staircase, his entire expression shifted. Not emotional, evaluative, like he was checking whether I looked presentable enough beside him. "You clean up well," he said with a small smile once I reached him. "Not you look beautiful. Not I'm glad you're here. Just you clean up well." Like I was part of the decor. Still, I smiled politely because tonight required patience. Around us, guests approached constantly. Law partners, judges, neighbors, old family friends. Everyone congratulated us on 35 years together as though longevity automatically meant happiness. I shook hands, accepted compliments, posed for photographs beside Daniel while flashes exploded around us. The performance had officially begun. Then I saw Vanessa. She stood near the ballroom bar, wearing a deep red dress that hugged her body like liquid silk. Every head turned when she moved, and she knew it. Vanessa noticed me watching her and smiled slowly before approaching. "Mrs. Henry?" she said warmly. The evening turned out beautifully. The audacity nearly stunned me. She spoke like a hostess at my own anniversary party. "It certainly did," I replied calmly. Daniel stepped beside her almost instinctively. "You should take credit," he told Vanessa. "This whole night was your vision. Your vision, not ours, not Fiona's." Vanessa lowered her eyes modestly. I just wanted everything to feel unforgettable. Something dangerous moved through me at those words. Unforgettable. Oh, it would be, just not in the way either of them expected. As the evening continued, I began noticing things guests probably missed. The way Daniel constantly searched for Vanessa across the room, the private glances, the subtle smiles, the silent communication between people who shared secrets. At one point, I watched Vanessa straighten Daniel's cufflink while standing far too close to him near the dance floor. A married man shouldn't allow another woman to touch him like that publicly. Not at his anniversary party. Several guests noticed too. I could tell by the awkward looks quickly hidden behind polite smiles. Affairs often survive because people prefer comfort over confrontation. But discomfort spreads through rooms, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. Around 7:30, Ethan arrived. The second he walked into the ballroom, relief washed through me so intensely I almost cried. My son crossed the room immediately and kissed my cheek. "You okay?" he whispered quietly. I nodded. But Ethan kept studying my face carefully. Then his eyes shifted toward Daniel and Vanessa standing together near the stage. His jaw tightened instantly. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Ethan rarely reacted emotionally without reason. "You see it too, don't you?" I asked quietly before I could stop myself. Ethan glanced at me sharply. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. Then he answered carefully. "I see enough." That single sentence told me everything. My son knew. Maybe not all the details, but enough. Meanwhile, Megan still moved through the ballroom, trying desperately to maintain normalcy. I watched her laughing too loudly at conversations while occasionally glancing toward Vanessa with growing discomfort. Reality was beginning to crack through denial. And once cracks appear, truth spreads quickly. At 8 o'clock, dinner began. The ballroom lights dimmed softly while waiters served filet mignon and wine. Daniel sat at the center table beside me. Vanessa sat only 2 seats away. Too close. Far too close for professional colleagues. Every time Daniel made a joke, Vanessa laughed first. Every time Vanessa spoke, Daniel looked at her before anyone else. And suddenly, I realized something humiliating. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Not really. Because they assumed I was powerless. Halfway through dinner, Daniel stood to greet another guest across the room. The second he walked away, Vanessa leaned toward me slightly. "You must be proud tonight," she said smoothly. I turned slowly. "Why's that?" She smiled faintly. "Daniel's built such an incredible legacy. Legacy. Again, everything revolved around him. I studied her carefully. Young, confident, certain she was about to inherit my life. Then she added quietly, "He really deserves happiness." The implication sat heavily between us. And for the first time all evening, I stopped pretending. I looked directly into her eyes and said calmly, "Happiness built on humiliation never lasts." Vanessa's smile flickered briefly, just for a second. Then Daniel returned before either of us could speak again. By 9 o'clock, the ballroom lights dimmed further. The stage illuminated. A giant image appeared on the LED screen behind it, 35 years of love and success. Daniel and Fiona Henry. Guests applauded warmly. Daniel stood slowly adjusting his tuxedo jacket while smiling confidently at the crowd. He loved attention. Always had. As he walked toward the stage, holding a champagne glass, the ballroom fell silent in anticipation. Something deep inside me became perfectly still, because suddenly I knew this was the moment, the final test, the last opportunity for Daniel to choose dignity instead of cruelty. My fingers tightened around the small flash drive hidden inside my purse. One decision remained. And my husband still had no idea how close his entire world stood to destruction. Daniel looked magnificent on that stage. That's the truth. At 61, my husband still knew how to command a room better than almost anyone I had ever met. The ballroom lights softened around him, while 200 guests watched with admiration shining in their eyes. He held the microphone comfortably smiling, the polished smile that had won juries, investors, politicians, and television audiences for years. For one dangerous moment, I almost doubted myself again. Maybe grief does strange things to people. Maybe betrayal had distorted my perspective. Maybe I should let the night pass quietly and walk away later with dignity. Then Daniel opened his mouth. "I want to thank all of you for coming tonight," he began warmly. 35 years of marriage is quite an accomplishment. Soft laughter moved through the ballroom. Daniel looked directly at me. "And trust me," he added with a grin, "staying married, that long takes patience." More laughter. Polite, comfortable, safe. The kind of harmless marriage humor wealthy couples perform at formal events. I forced a smile. My fingers tightened slowly around my champagne glass beneath the table. Daniel continued speaking. "When Fiona and I first met, we were young, ambitious, and full of dreams." His voice softened just enough to sound emotional. "We built a beautiful life together. A family, a home, a future." Applause scattered lightly through the room. Then came the shift, tiny at first, almost invisible. "But marriage also teaches you something else," Daniel said thoughtfully. "People change." Something cold moved through my stomach. Several guests leaned in attentively. Daniel smiled again. "Sometimes one person keeps growing, while the other gets a little too comfortable." The room responded with uncertain chuckles. I saw Megan's smile fade instantly. Ethan went completely still beside me. Daniel kept going. "And let's be honest," he continued casually, "after 35 years, romance starts looking a little different." He glanced toward me with exaggerated amusement. "A lot different." This time, the laughter sounded strained. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Daniel interpreted discomfort as permission instead of warning. Men like him often do. He took a sip of champagne dramatically. "I mean, Fiona used to actually care when we went out in public," he joked. "Now getting her dressed for an event feels like negotiating with a hostage." A few people laughed awkwardly. My face burned instantly. Not because the joke was clever, because it was cruel. And because Daniel knew exactly how to disguise cruelty as humor. I stared down at my folded hands while years of humiliation suddenly replayed inside my head. Every insult disguised as concern. Every criticism disguised as advice. Every wound delivered politely enough to make me question whether I had the right to feel hurt. Daniel walked slowly across the stage, fully enjoying himself now. "She used to keep up with me," he continued. "Now she just tells me I work too much and need to slow down." He shrugged theatrically. "But some of us aren't ready for retirement yet." A louder burst of laughter followed. Not because people necessarily agreed, because crowds follow confidence, and Daniel radiated confidence. Meanwhile, I sat silently, like the punchline of my own marriage. I glanced toward Vanessa. She sat near the front of the ballroom, smiling openly now. Not embarrassed, not uncomfortable, pleased. Watching my humiliation like a reward she believed she earned. That expression changed something inside me permanently. Because suddenly, I understood this wasn't accidental. Daniel wasn't making careless jokes. He was performing dominance, and Vanessa was enjoying the spectacle. Then Daniel delivered the sentence that erased every remaining ounce of mercy I still carried for him. "You know," he said with a smirk, "marriage teaches men an important lesson." The room quieted slightly. You can deeply love someone and still outgrow them. Silence. Real silence this time. Even the air in the ballroom felt different suddenly. Heavy. Dangerous. My heartbeat slowed strangely. Across the room, I saw Linda close her eyes briefly, like she already knew what was coming next. Ethan's jaw tightened hard enough, I thought he might stand up immediately. Megan looked horrified, but Daniel kept smiling. Because narcissistic people mistake silence for admiration when they're intoxicated by attention. He looked directly at me under the ballroom lights. I hope you know I'm grateful for everything you've done, Fiona. The words sounded almost kind, until he added, not every woman could dedicate her entire life to supporting someone else's success. There it was, the final humiliation, publicly reducing my entire existence to serving his greatness. I felt something inside my chest go perfectly cold. Not emotional, not explosive. Clear. Crystal clear. Daniel raised his champagne glass toward the crowd. To sacrifice, he declared proudly. Scattered applause followed uncertainly. And suddenly, I understood something deeply important. He truly believed he was winning. He thought tonight proved his superiority. He thought I would smile politely while he erased my dignity piece by piece in front of everyone we knew. He thought decades of emotional neglect had weakened me permanently. He had absolutely no idea who I was becoming underneath the silence he mistook for submission. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan stood up. Not dramatically, just slowly. But the movement caught Daniel's attention immediately. Dad, Ethan said calmly. Maybe that's enough. The ballroom froze. Daniel blinked in surprise. What Ethan's voice stayed controlled. I said, maybe that's enough. A dangerous tension spread instantly across the room. Daniel laughed awkwardly into the microphone. My son thinks I'm embarrassing your mother. No one laughed this time, because suddenly people could feel it too. This wasn't affectionate teasing. This was cruelty. Daniel's smile stiffened slightly. Oh, come on, he said dismissively. Your mother knows I'm joking. Then he looked directly at me. Right, Fiona. 200 faces turned toward me at once, waiting, watching, judging. My pulse thundered softly in my ears. This was it. The final opportunity. The last chance Daniel would ever have to stop. All he needed to do was show 1 ounce of humanity, 1 ounce of remorse, 1 ounce of respect. Instead, he smirked. Actually smirked, and said, unless she's too emotional tonight. A few horrified gasps escaped nearby tables. Megan covered her mouth instantly. Even some of Daniel's law partners looked uncomfortable now, because everyone understood what he was doing, publicly diminishing me while disguising it as charm. And suddenly, something extraordinary happened inside me. The fear disappeared. Completely. Not because I stopped caring. Because I finally understood there was nothing left to save. You cannot save a marriage with someone who enjoys humiliating you. Slowly, I stood from my chair. The ballroom became so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the LED screen behind Daniel. My husband watched me carefully now, still confident, still certain he controlled the room. I picked up my purse calmly. Then I walked toward the stage. Every step felt strangely peaceful. Not dramatic, not rushed, certain. When I reached Daniel, he lowered the microphone slightly and forced a tight smile. Careful, he muttered quietly so only I could hear. Don't make a scene. I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt absolutely no fear of him. Then I gently took the microphone from his hand. The ballroom held its breath. I turned slowly toward the audience, toward our children, toward Vanessa, toward 200 people who thought they were attending a celebration. And finally, calmly, I spoke. "You're right, Daniel," I said softly. The room stayed silent. A marriage is defined by what we do for each other over time. Daniel relaxed slightly beside me, assuming I planned to preserve his image after all. Then I continued. "But I've learned something important recently." I glanced toward the giant LED screen behind us. A marriage is also defined by what we do when we think nobody is watching. And in that exact moment, Daniel's expression changed for the very first time that night. Because finally, he realized something was wrong. The ballroom went completely silent. Not polite silence, not attentive silence, the kind of silence that happens right before something irreversible. Daniel stood beside me, frozen beneath the stage lights, while I held the microphone steadily in my hand. For the first time all evening, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Real uncertainty. I turned calmly toward the audio-visual booth near the back of the ballroom. "Chris," I said softly, "please play my anniversary tribute." The young event manager hesitated briefly. His eyes flickered nervously between me and Daniel. Daniel recovered fast. Too fast. He laughed lightly into the tension. "Oh God," he joked to the audience, "I hope this isn't another slideshow of embarrassing family vacations." A few weak laughs scattered across the room, but nobody sounded comfortable anymore. Because instinctively, people could feel something shifting beneath the surface. I kept my eyes on the LED screen. Then finally, the lights dimmed. Soft piano music filled the ballroom, and the screen came alive. The first image appeared Daniel and me on our wedding day. I was 23 years old. He was 26. We looked radiant, hopeful, in love. A collective murmur softened through the crowd. Then more photographs followed. Daniel holding newborn Ethan in the hospital. Me dancing with Megan in our living room at Christmas. Beach vacations, family birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners. 35 years of ordinary love projected 20 feet high for everyone to see. Guests smiled warmly. Some even looked emotional. Beside me, Daniel relaxed visibly. Of course he did. This was the version of our marriage he preferred. Beautiful, curated, safe. I glanced sideways toward Vanessa. Her expression looked tense now. Good. The piano music continued while photographs faded one into another. The audience watched quietly as the story of our family unfolded. Then my voice appeared through the speakers. Recorded earlier that afternoon. For 35 years, my voice said softly, I believed marriage meant loyalty, sacrifice, and trust. The room remained still. I believed love meant protecting the person you built your life with. Daniel smiled faintly toward the audience. Still confident, still arrogant enough to think this moment belonged to him. Then the music changed. Subtly at first. The soft piano darkened. The family photographs faded away. And suddenly the screen went black. A strange tension spread instantly through the ballroom. Then the next image appeared. Daniel kissing Vanessa outside the Midtown apartment building. Sharp, clear, impossible to misunderstand. The ballroom gasped as one. Daniel stopped breathing beside me. Literally stopped. For half a second, the entire room froze in collective disbelief. Then another photograph appeared. Daniel and Vanessa holding hands leaving a hotel. Then another. Daniel touching her face outside Savannah Grill. Then another. The lease agreement. Vanessa Collins. Emergency contact, Daniel Henry. Murmurs exploded across the ballroom instantly. What the hell? Oh my God. "Is that Vanessa?" I heard chairs shifting, wine glasses setting down hard against tables. Someone near the front whispered, "No way." Daniel lunged toward me suddenly. "What are you doing?" he hissed violently. But before he could grab the microphone, Ethan stood up immediately and moved between us. "Don't touch her," my son said coldly. The firmness in Ethan's voice stunned even me. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. "Move." "No." Behind them, the screen kept playing. Text messages now appeared across the massive LED wall. "I can't wait until this fake anniversary is over. Soon we won't have to hide anymore. You deserve better than a bitter old wife." A horrified sound escaped somewhere in the ballroom. Megan covered her mouth with both hands while tears filled her eyes instantly. Across the room, Vanessa had gone completely pale. She looked like someone watching her future collapse in real time. Daniel turned toward the audiovisual booth furiously. "Turn it off." But Chris stood frozen, probably too shocked to move. Then the next audio clip began. Daniel's own voice filled the ballroom speakers. "After the anniversary party, I'll finally be free." Absolute silence followed. No music, no movement, just 200 people listening to the truth my husband never thought would become public. Daniel looked around wildly now. Not guilty, cornered. There's a difference. Men like Daniel don't fear hurting people. They fear losing control of how people see them. And for the first time in decades, he had completely lost control. "This is manipulated," he snapped suddenly. "This is insane." Nobody answered him because the evidence was overwhelming. Photographs, receipts, messages, audio. Years of courtroom experience couldn't save him from visible truth. I stood perfectly still while the ballroom descended into chaos around us. Some guests stared openly. Others looked away awkwardly. Several of Daniel's law partners whispered furiously among themselves near the back tables. And through all of it, I felt strangely calm. Not triumphant, not hysterical. Free. That was the shocking part. I had imagined revenge would feel explosive. Instead, it felt quiet, like finally setting down something unbearably heavy after carrying it too long. Then, Vanessa suddenly stood up. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. Her voice cracked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Daniel spun toward her immediately. "Shut up!" But panic had already overtaken her. "You said she'd never find out," Vanessa blurted. Gasps rippled across the room again. Daniel's face drained of color. "Vanessa, you told me the marriage was already dead." There it was. The final crack, because affairs survive through fantasy. And once fantasy breaks publicly, people start protecting themselves instead of each other. Daniel stepped toward her furiously. "You need to stop talking." But Vanessa looked terrified now. "No," she snapped suddenly. "You don't get to blame me for this." I watched them carefully. The lovers who once looked so united suddenly resembled strangers trapped inside a burning building. Interesting how quickly passion collapses once consequences arrive. Megan began crying openly at her table. "Mom," she whispered brokenly. I looked at my daughter and felt my heart ache despite everything. Because betrayal never destroys only marriages. It damages everyone standing nearby, too. Daniel turned back toward me desperately. "Fiona, please. Please." The first genuine word he'd spoken to me in months. Not because he suddenly cared about my pain. Because he finally cared about his own. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," he hissed quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. Then slowly, I repeated his own words back to him. Don't make a scene, Daniel. Several nearby guests heard it. I saw recognition cross their faces instantly. They understood. This wasn't one cruel moment. This had been happening for a long time. Daniel looked around the ballroom wildly again. His reputation, the thing he valued above everything, was collapsing table by table right in front of him. People weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him with judgment, disgust, pity. And suddenly I realized something profound. Powerful men often believe they are untouchable because people protect their image for them. Wives protect it. Children protect it. Friends protect it. Communities protect it. Until one day, someone stops. The final image appeared on the screen behind us. A simple black background with white words. The truth does not destroy marriages. Lies do. The ballroom stayed silent. No applause, no music, just reality hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. Then, slowly, very slowly, Ethan walked to my side and stood beside me on that stage. Not beside his father, beside me. And in that moment, while Daniel Henry stood watching his perfect image crumble beneath the giant screen he helped build, I finally stopped feeling ashamed of surviving him. The ballroom no longer looked elegant. It looked like a disaster zone wrapped in crystal chandeliers and expensive silk. People whispered openly now. Some guests stood near the exits pretending to check their phones while secretly staring at Daniel. Others avoided eye contact, completely desperate not to get pulled into the implosion happening in front of them. And through it all, the giant LED screen behind the stage still glowed with the final words, "The truth does not destroy marriages. Lies do." Daniel looked like a man drowning publicly. But instead of remorse, anger consumed him first. That told me everything I needed to know about who he really was. "This is insane," he snapped loudly. "She invaded my privacy and manipulated evidence." His voice cracked slightly at the end. Not from heartbreak, from panic. I stood silently beside Ethan while Daniel turned desperately toward the crowd. "You all know me," he insisted. "You know my character." That sentence almost made me laugh. Because men who truly possess character rarely need to announce it during scandals. One of Daniel's law partners, Richard Nolan, stood slowly from a nearby table. His expression looked grim. "Daniel," he said carefully, "is any of this false?" The room held its breath. This was the moment. The simplest question in the world. "Is it true?" Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, looked toward Vanessa, then toward me. And in that hesitation, everyone got their answer. A soft murmur spread across the ballroom instantly. You could practically feel people changing sides in real time. That's how fragile reputations really are. Years to build, seconds to crack. Then suddenly, Vanessa stood up. No one expected it, not even Daniel. Her face looked pale and furious beneath the ballroom lights. "You don't get to act innocent now," she snapped at him. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "Vanessa, no." The sharpness in her voice cut through the ballroom like broken glass. "I'm not standing here alone while you pretend I forced you into this." I watched Daniel's expression shift instantly from panic to fury. Because affairs survive through shared fantasy. But once public humiliation enters the room, lovers become liabilities to each other. Vanessa stepped forward shakily. "You told me your marriage was over years ago," she said loudly. "You told me Fiona only stayed because of money." Gasps spread through the crowd again. My stomach twisted painfully. Even when you already know betrayal happened, hearing the details publicly hurts differently. Daniel moved toward Vanessa quickly. "Stop talking." But she was spiraling now. No, Daniel. You promised me. His face darkened. Vanessa. You said after tonight we'd finally stop hiding. The ballroom erupted into whispers. Megan burst into tears completely. My daughter looked physically ill. And suddenly, I realized she wasn't just grieving the affair. She was grieving the illusion of her father. That's one of the cruelest things about discovering a parent's betrayal as an adult. You don't only lose trust, you lose history. Every memory becomes questionable. Every lesson they taught you feels contaminated somehow. Daniel turned toward the audience again desperately. She's emotional, he snapped. This isn't how things actually happened. Emotional. There it was again. The same word he always used when women became inconvenient. But this time, something fascinating happened. Nobody believed him anymore. Because once evidence becomes undeniable, manipulation starts sounding pathetic instead of persuasive. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Oh my God," she said. "You're really going to do this?" Daniel glared at her. "You need to calm down." Vanessa's expression twisted with disbelief. "Calm down," she repeated. "You rented me an apartment. You told me we'd be together publicly after tonight." Every word hit the ballroom like another explosion. I noticed several of Daniel's business associates exchanging deeply uncomfortable looks. One older judge quietly stood and left through a side exit without speaking to anyone. Two major clients followed shortly after. Powerful men protect themselves quickly when scandals become toxic. Daniel saw it happening too, and for the first time that night, genuine fear entered his face. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing status. That distinction mattered deeply. Then Vanessa made the mistake that destroyed him completely. She reached into her purse with shaking hands. "You know what?" she snapped. "I'm done protecting you." Daniel lunged toward her instantly, but Ethan stepped forward again. "Back off." The tension in the ballroom became almost unbearable. Vanessa pulled out her phone and raised it toward the crowd. "I still have all his messages," she said bitterly. "All of them." Daniel looked like he might actually collapse. Vanessa stopped. But she kept going. "He promised to put my name on the condo after the divorce." Another collective gasp. "And he said Fiona was too weak to ever fight back." The room went dead silent again. Those words hurt more than I expected. Too weak. 35 years of sacrifice reduced to weakness in his private conversations. But strangely, I didn't feel broken hearing it anymore. I felt finished. Finished protecting a man who enjoyed diminishing me. Finished carrying shame that belonged to him. Finished apologizing for noticing cruelty. Megan suddenly stood up from her table crying. "Dad, how could you do this?" Daniel turned toward her immediately. "Megan, sweetheart." "Don't call me that right now." The pain in her voice nearly shattered me. She looked between Daniel and Vanessa like she no longer recognized either of them. Then slowly, Megan turned toward me. And I saw something I had waited months to see. Understanding. Real understanding. Tears streamed down her face. "Mom?" she whispered brokenly. "I'm so sorry." The apology hit harder than I expected, because part of me had prepared myself to lose my daughter completely through this. Instead, she finally saw the truth. Not just about the affair, about the humiliation, the manipulation, the emotional erosion that had been happening quietly for years. Daniel looked around desperately now. Cornered animals become dangerous, and narcissistic men become cruelest when humiliation strips away their control. "This woman," he snapped, suddenly pointing at me, "has been spying on me for months." I stared at him in disbelief. Not remorse, not accountability. Blame. Always blame. You publicly humiliated me tonight, he hissed. Slowly, I walked toward him. The ballroom became silent again. I looked directly into the face of the man I spent 35 years loving. And suddenly, I felt strangely calm. You humiliated yourself, Daniel, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. You could have left me honestly. Silence. You could have divorced me privately. More silence. You could have treated me with basic dignity after everything we built together. Daniel looked away briefly, and that tiny moment mattered, because deep down, even he knew I was right. Then I said the sentence that truly ended our marriage forever. But you wanted an audience? The words landed heavily between us, because they were true. This entire night had been designed as theater. Daniel simply never expected the ending to change. Across the ballroom, I noticed more guests leaving quietly now. Not dramatically, just distancing themselves from the wreckage. That's another truth about status people love successful men, until success becomes embarrassing. Vanessa suddenly looked exhausted. Not glamorous, not victorious, just scared. She stared at Daniel like she was finally seeing him clearly for the first time, too. Interesting how quickly illusion dies once cruelty turns public. Then one of Daniel's senior law partners approached the stage slowly. His expression looked grave. Daniel, he said quietly, we'll discuss this Monday. Corporate language for your career is in danger. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. And finally, I saw the full weight of consequences begin settling onto him. Not because he lost me, because he lost control. And for a man like Daniel Henry, those two things were never the same. I did not go home with Daniel that night. That detail mattered more than I expected. Because for 35 years, no matter how bad things became between us, we always returned home together. Weddings, funerals, arguments, holidays, silent car rides after uncomfortable dinners. We always ended the night under the same roof, but after the anniversary party, something final had broken. Not dramatically, not loudly, permanently. The ballroom slowly emptied behind us while hotel staff awkwardly cleared untouched desserts and abandoned champagne glasses. It looked like the aftermath of a storm. Daniel stood near the stage, still arguing quietly with one of his law partners, while Vanessa disappeared through a side exit without looking back. Interesting. The woman who once smiled at me with such confidence could not leave the building fast enough once consequences arrived. Affairs often feel glamorous until reality enters the room. Then suddenly, everyone starts protecting themselves. Ethan approached me carefully while I stood near the ballroom entrance holding my purse. You ready to go? He asked softly. I nodded. Megan stood several feet behind him, crying quietly. The second our eyes met, fresh guilt flooded her expression. Mom, she whispered again. I walked toward my daughter slowly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Megan burst into tears completely. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I thought maybe you were exaggerating. The pain in her voice broke something inside me. Because she wasn't cruel. She was manipulated, just like I had been. I pulled her into my arms immediately, and suddenly my daughter was a little girl again, crying against my shoulder, while I held her through heartbreak neither of us fully understood yet. It's okay, I whispered softly. But honestly, it wasn't okay. None of it was okay. Not the affair, not the humiliation, not the months Daniel spent slowly convincing our children I was unstable. Still, I understood something important in that moment. Daniel's betrayal damaged all of us differently. Megan lost the image of her father. Ethan lost trust. I lost a marriage. There were no winners standing in that ballroom, only survivors. Ethan drove me to Linda's house around midnight. The city lights blurred past the car windows, while silence filled the vehicle heavily. Halfway there, Ethan finally spoke. "Did you know he was going to humiliate you like that?" I stared out the window for several seconds before answering. I hoped he wouldn't. That was the truth. Even after everything, some part of me still hoped Daniel would choose kindness at the last possible moment. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter. I've never seen someone look at another person with that much disrespect. His voice carried controlled anger now. Not explosive. Dangerous. "I should have said something earlier," he muttered. "You didn't know." I knew enough. That sentence lingered painfully between us, because maybe we all knew pieces of the truth before admitting them aloud. Sometimes families sense collapse long before anyone acknowledges it. Linda opened the front door before we even knocked. The second she saw my face, she pulled me into a hug. "Come inside. No questions, no curiosity. Just compassion." That first night after the party, I barely slept. Not because I regretted what I'd done, because adrenaline finally faded, and underneath adrenaline was grief. Real grief, not for the marriage itself. For the years. 35 years is long enough to build an entire identity around another person. Then suddenly, overnight, you become someone else. Divorcing after decades feels less like ending a relationship and more like surviving a demolition. The next morning, my phone exploded. Calls, texts, voicemails, friends, neighbors, extended family, even people I barely spoke to anymore. Word had spread across Atlanta overnight. Of course it had. Scandals involving wealthy, respected men travel quickly, especially when there's video evidence projected onto a 20-foot screen. I ignored almost everyone, except one message. "Daniel, please call me." 3 simple words. No apology, no accountability, just urgency. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally locking the phone again. Around noon, Linda sat beside me at the kitchen table while sorting legal documents calmly. "We need to move quickly," she said. The practicality of her tone grounded me instantly. Why? Because men like Daniel become strategic once consequences arrive. That sentence proved true almost immediately. Within hours, I learned Daniel had already contacted his financial advisor, then his attorney, then his public relations consultant. Even after everything, his first instinct remained reputation management, not repairing damage emotionally, managing optics professionally. That realization removed the last traces of guilt I still carried. Later that afternoon, Linda drove me to meet Patricia Moore, a divorce attorney specializing in high-net-worth cases. Patricia's office overlooked downtown Atlanta through enormous windows. She greeted me warmly but directly. I watched the video she admitted carefully. Of course she had. By then, half the city probably had. Strangely, embarrassment no longer bothered me. Because once humiliation becomes public, enough shame loses its power. Patricia reviewed the financial records quietly for nearly 40 minutes. Then she removed her glasses and looked directly at me. "Fiona, your husband has serious exposure here." Exposure. He used marital funds to support an extramarital relationship. Her voice stayed clinical, precise, professional. Exactly what I needed. "The apartment lease alone is problematic," she continued. "Combined with transferred assets and documented expenditures." She shook her head slightly. He was preparing financially before separation. Hearing it from a lawyer made the betrayal feel even colder somehow. Patricia leaned forward slightly. "You need to understand something clearly." I nodded slowly. "You are not powerless here." That sentence hit me harder than expected. Because for months, maybe years, I had felt powerless. Emotionally, financially, socially. Women in long marriages often disappear gradually into supporting roles until they forget they exist independently at all. Patricia outlined next steps carefully: asset protection, legal filings, financial freezes, documentation. Everything sounded surreal, like I was suddenly managing someone else's life instead of my own. Then she asked quietly, "What outcome do you want?" I thought about that for a long moment. Revenge. No punishment. Not exactly. I want peace, I whispered. Patricia nodded slowly. That usually comes after truth. When I returned to Linda's house that evening, Daniel was waiting outside. The sight of him standing beside his black Mercedes nearly stopped my heart. He looked terrible. Wrinkled suit, dark circles beneath his eyes. Exhausted. For the first time in years, Daniel Henry did not look powerful. He looked exposed. The second he saw me, he stepped forward quickly. "Fiona." I stopped several feet away. Linda remained beside me silently. "Smart woman." Daniel ran a hand shakily through his hair. "We need to talk." "No," I said quietly. "You need to talk. I spent months talking." Pain flickered across his face briefly. Real pain this time? Interesting. Consequences had finally made him emotional. "Please," he whispered. I stared at him carefully. This man once held my entire heart in his hands. Now he looked like a stranger wearing pieces of someone I used to love. "You humiliated me," he said softly. I almost laughed from disbelief. Then suddenly anger surged through me for the first time since the party. "No, Daniel," I said firmly. "You humiliated yourself. I simply stopped protecting you from it." He flinched. Good, because for decades I had protected his image at the expense of my own dignity. No more. Daniel looked down briefly before speaking again. The firm suspended me pending internal review. There it was, the real panic. Career consequences, professional damage, public shame. Not once did he say I hurt you. Not once did he say I'm sorry. Even now, Daniel mourned his reputation more than our marriage. And finally I understood that had always been true. 6 months after the anniversary party, I stood barefoot in my kitchen making blueberry pancakes while sunlight poured through the windows of the house I thought I was going to lose. The silence felt different now. Peaceful, not lonely. That distinction mattered. For years, I confused survival with peace because I had grown so accustomed to shrinking myself emotionally inside my marriage. Now, for the first time in decades, I could breathe inside my own life again. The divorce became official in early spring. Ironically, it ended much faster than I expected. Not because Daniel suddenly became generous, because evidence leaves very little room for performance once lawyers become involved. The apartment, the financial transfers, the hotel receipts, the use of marital assets, everything documented, everything traceable. Patricia Moore had been right from the beginning. I was not powerless. In the settlement, I kept the house, half the investment accounts, retirement assets, and most importantly, my dignity. That last part mattered more than the money ever could. Daniel fought viciously during the first few weeks. Not emotionally, strategically. He tried delaying paperwork, questioning valuations, arguing over details that once would have intimidated me completely. But something had changed inside me after the anniversary party. I no longer feared disappointing him. That freedom transformed everything. Once a woman stops seeking approval from the person hurting her, she becomes difficult to control. Daniel eventually realized that too late. His professional life collapsed quietly after the scandal. The law firm never publicly announced the details, of course. Powerful institutions rarely expose themselves willingly, but people talked. Clients disappeared. Partnership meetings happened behind closed doors. Within 3 months, Daniel was asked to step away temporarily. Temporary became permanent. For a man who built his entire identity around status and admiration, the loss devastated him. Sometimes I wonder if he ever truly understood that he destroyed himself long before I exposed him publicly. The giant screen didn't ruin Daniel Henry. His choices did. Vanessa disappeared almost immediately after the fallout. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved to Dallas for another public relations position. Apparently, she left Atlanta within weeks. That didn't surprise me. Relationships built on secrecy rarely survive public consequences, especially when admiration turns into blame. Oddly enough, I stopped hating Vanessa after a while. Not because she was innocent. She wasn't. But eventually, I understood something important. Women like Vanessa are symptoms. Men like Daniel are the decision makers. He opened the door. He created the betrayal. He chose cruelty repeatedly. Blaming only the younger woman would have been emotionally easier, but it wouldn't have been honest. One Saturday afternoon in April, Daniel came by the house to collect the last of his things. I almost didn't recognize him when I opened the door. He looked older. Not physically alone. Spiritually, like shame had finally settled into his posture. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, holding cardboard boxes, while silence stretched between us. "This place looks different," he said quietly. I glanced around the living room. Fresh flowers, new curtains, more sunlight somehow. "I repainted," I answered. Daniel nodded slowly. Then his eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting near the bookshelf. Me, Ethan, Megan, all three of us smiling together at a small family dinner weeks earlier. No Daniel. Something unreadable crossed his face. Regret, maybe, or simply loneliness. "Ethan barely answers my calls anymore," he admitted softly. The pain in his voice sounded genuine, but consequences often arrive emotionally long after damage is done. "Megan's trying," I said carefully. "She just needs time." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I never meant to lose my children." That sentence stayed with me long after he left, because maybe for the first time he finally understood betrayal spreads outward like fire. It burns everything nearby, not just marriages, families, trust, memory, identity. And once destruction begins, nobody controls where it stops. After he carried the final box to his car, Daniel paused at the front door. Then quietly, almost too quietly to hear, he said, "I did love you once." I looked at him for a long moment. The man I married, the man who betrayed me, the man who humiliated me publicly, the man who once made me believe love could survive anything. And strangely, I believed him. I think he did love me once. But love without respect eventually becomes something else. Something smaller. Something selfish. "I know," I answered softly. Daniel nodded once. Then he walked away, and this time watching him leave didn't break me. It freed me. A month later, I started volunteering twice a week at a women's community center in Atlanta. At first, I only intended to help organize literacy classes. Then one afternoon, another volunteer asked if I'd be willing to lead a support discussion for older women rebuilding their lives after divorce. The idea terrified me. For decades, I had spent my life in supporting roles. Quiet roles, invisible roles. Women like me aren't taught to take up space publicly. But I agreed anyway. The first meeting changed me completely. There were 12 women sitting in folding chairs, drinking coffee and pretending not to cry. Different ages, different stories, but the same grief, the same humiliation, The same slow erosion of self-worth that happens when someone convinces you your value decreases with age. One woman whispered, "I don't even know who I am anymore without him." And suddenly, I realized something heartbreaking. So many women disappear long before their marriages officially end. Not physically, emotionally. They spend years becoming smaller to preserve someone else's comfort. That afternoon, I told them something I wish someone had told me years earlier. Aging does not make you less worthy of love, respect, or joy. Several women cried. Honestly, so did I. Because I finally believed those words myself. On the first anniversary after the scandal, Ethan and Megan came over for dinner. No ballroom, no champagne tower, no photographers, just family. Real family. Ethan grilled salmon in the backyard, while Megan helped me plate roasted vegetables in the kitchen. At one point, my daughter wrapped her arms around me from behind suddenly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. The words nearly shattered me, not because I needed validation anymore, because healing sounds a lot like love returning quietly after devastation. Later that night, after dinner ended and dishes were stacked in the sink, I stepped outside onto the back porch alone. The air smelled like jasmine and summer rain. Inside the house, I could hear my children laughing together. And for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel fragile. It felt safe. I thought about the woman standing silently beneath those ballroom chandeliers months earlier. The woman terrified of losing her marriage. Terrified of being abandoned. Terrified of becoming invisible. She had no idea that losing the wrong person sometimes saves you from losing yourself completely. People still ask me if exposing Daniel publicly was worth it. Honestly, that's the wrong question. The real question is this: how long should a woman remain silent while someone destroys her dignity privately? Because eventually, silence stops being grace. It becomes permission, and I finally stopped giving mine away. After everything that happened, I learned a painful truth that many women discover far too late in life. Love alone is not enough to sustain a marriage. Respect matters just as much. Loyalty matters. Kindness matters. And once someone begins humiliating you repeatedly while expecting your silence in return, that relationship stops being a partnership and starts becoming emotional survival. For years, I believed enduring pain quietly made me strong. I thought protecting my husband's image was more important than protecting my own heart. Many women from my generation were raised that way. We were taught to sacrifice, to forgive endlessly, and to confuse silence with dignity. But silence is not always noble. Sometimes silence is the very thing that allows cruelty to continue. What finally changed my life was not revenge. It was self-respect. The moment I stopped begging to be valued by someone determined to diminish me, I began reclaiming myself. And that healing did not happen overnight. Healing came slowly through truth, through support, through my children, finding their way back to me, and through learning that growing older does not make a woman less valuable. If you are watching this while feeling invisible, unloved, betrayed, or emotionally exhausted inside your own relationship, please hear me clearly. Your worth does not decrease because someone else failed to honor it. You are not too old to begin again. You are not too broken to heal. And you are never weak for finally choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else first. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop protecting the person hurting her. If this story touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to reclaim your dignity after someone betrayed your trust? Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? I read so many of your comments, and your stories remind me that none of us are ever truly alone. And if stories about strength, healing, family, and emotional justice speak to you, please don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue this journey together.